Hello, my name is Mr. Fear, and this is Pointless Witticisms, the show where I talk about things that I don't feel matter too much anytime soon. This is Fear Clinic, a film starring Robert Englund, best known as that guy who was in Nightmare on Elm Street, and it is based on a web series. It's a film adaptation of an existing horror property of sorts. It's about a group of survivors of a violent shooting, each coached in escaping their fears by the least scary-sounding doctor to work in the theatre of human fear ever since Dr. Jonathan Crane started creating a spooky gas that makes you hallucinate your worst nightmares. Any comparisons between this mad but visionary doctor and Scarecrow, the villain from Batman, are of course compounded by the fact that the actor Robert Englund has voiced the Scarecrow on a number of occasions. Actor Robert Englund has also starred in a number of films where he enters people's nightmares, and that's also a comparison that people should be making throughout any viewings of this film. A number of the Doctor's patients have all returned, each suffering scary flashbacks of the fears that they thought they'd had cured. They're all suffering from a condition known as fear aftershock. That's fear aftershock, a phenomena where someone can smell gunpowder or see flashes of gunshots. You know, I swear there's another word for something like that other than fear aftershocks. This doesn't feel like fear as much as treating post-traumatic stress disorder in an appealing and Hollywood sort of way. You know, we'll just coach you through your nightmares using a very spooky looking chamber and a doctor wearing a horrifying looking mask that's kind of cool to see on Robert Englund's face. It's got all these less scary terms than post-traumatic distress, than PTSD or triggers, and the film keeps going on about how fear is a natural part of you. You can't cure fear. Fear is more powerful than anything, while at the same time being about the struggle to rid yourself of fear. And then of course the film goes back and goes forth and goes back and forth on whether you can or can't cure yourself of fear. I mean, symbolically, the horde of evil fear goo in this film is supposedly meant to represent all the problems that come from your fear being suppressed and being held back, and being this force that spills out of you and repulses anyone who's really exposed to it. But, yeah, this film has black evil fear goo that makes you afraid, or it makes you scary and or evil if you're exposed to it. It does evil stuff. It is evil fear goo from all the fear that people aren't feeling, and it is part of an evil fear entity from inside the fear dimension that makes people feel fear, except it also feeds off your fear, so it needs people to feel fear for it to be able to make you to feel fear. The evil fear entity does this, of course, by killing people and also by putting people in comas. None of the scenes with it in are altogether that much or very interesting, although they do include some silly string versions of Venom from Spider-Man, so that's nice, and the scary fear goo monster is also in this film. This is kind of a disappointment because the scariest image of this film is a nude woman with stitches up and down her chest in a vaguely vaginal shape, whose back arches and whose bones keep making these clicking noises as she twists her way around a vague and snowy wasteland surrounding the spooky fear pod that people go in when they want to have their fears cured from them. And this is a bit of a scary monster design because it's just someone normal with a few horrible changes to them. It's very minimalistic, and we don't get to see what's inside her when her chest opens up all these stitches, and the characters are of course afraid of her because she's supposed to be dead. It's someone who's already died appearing to them inside the fear dimension. And yeah, it's either her or the other monster, which is Robert Englund covered in big black goo stuff from the fear goo, and he runs around squishing people with goo and looking way too close to being a Power Rangers villain for comfort. The characters are afraid of him because he is a big black goo monster. The other monster in the film is some guy in a black mask and a lot of body armor carrying around a gun, which the main characters are of course afraid of because he killed various people in a diner in front of them, causing to develop various fears, whether it be of eating or of the dark, about various facets that they focus on when they remember that traumatic experience of some man in a spooky bit of body armor and a featureless black mask going around shooting at people. Monsters can scare the characters of a film for different reasons to why they are scaring the audience, and it is usually a lot of fun to see these weird blends of what the characters are afraid of and what the audience are being afraid of, because a lot of times we're privy to information that the characters aren't. But in films such as Alien, we're always on the same wavelength because the monster is spooky and hidden from us and the characters don't know where it is. Here, we, the audience, might not expect to be scared by a masked gunman as much as anything else because it's almost mundane compared to the evil fear goo monster and the dead girl, but the way the film shows it to us in flashbacks and the way the characters would see it with all these odd focuses on bits in the environment or on one person's face at a time, with the details becoming a bit of a blur in places, it all sort of drags you into these scenes and the same level of trauma that or a similar level of looking back at this trauma to what the characters would get. On the other hand, though, all these things and all this talk of a masked gunman is of course building up to a spooky fear blob monster and a weird sort of mask putting on scene where the mask has fear goo on it so it sticks to someone's face. Like, the fear goo monster has some impact, and the fear goo being vomited up and coming out of people's scars has some symbolism in it about how the fear is present in every part of people and how this fear is a part of you and what have you and how that sort of spills out. But turning that into one angry blobbing thing, this monster, it takes the potential of it and it runs away with it. There's this whole opportunity to go whole hog on what people are actually fearing, although I suppose the Mad Doctor probably could have feared becoming a fear goo monster, or just have been afraid of traumatizing his patients and haunting them and hurting their recovery rather than helping them. But that's not quite what it felt like when he turned into a fear goo monster. It just sort of felt like a fear goo monster that is there to be scary and be on the cover of the film and on the back of the box, because the ongoing spectre of trauma doesn't quite capture the average low-budget horror movie theatre-goer's audience's attention. Well, other than films like The Babadook, where the monster is representative of the impact of grief and the weight that puts on your life, and that sort of kept people interested in that film. Was I expecting more from a film called The Fear Clinic, starring Robert Englund? No, I was not. I just picked it up because the box cover looked cool, and the back of the box had a fear goo monster on it, and that looked interesting. And of course I know that Robert Englund had his name on it, and I know he does horror good, and he has a nice voice, and that's a voice that I nearly fell asleep to a few times when he was trying to put people into the fear pod and speak to them in a slightly hypnotic manner. That sort of like, pay close attention to my voice thing. I can't do a very good Robert Englund impression. This film is just sort of there, nothing to see here, just fear goo and Robert Englund and a few cool scenes like the one in the snow with the woman with the stitched up chest. About on par for low budget horror films. Check it out if you're just checking out horror films in general. Otherwise, it's a bit of a shelf stuffer. Like, average as far as films go. Not quite mediocre, but not the best. Thanks for listening!